Everyone, my name is Mark Rye. I'm the VP of Sales with Param Corporation, and thank you for joining us for the webinar today. We're going to talk about why do enterprise content management deployments fail. If you're new to GoToMeeting, you probably have a sidebar on the right side of your screen, which will minimize and maximize with the orange arrow. Near the bottom of that section, there should be a questions panel. So if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, feel free to enter them in, and I will check from time to time and address those questions. We're scheduled for 30 minutes, so let's get started. So the topic of enterprise content management systems and the success or failure of those deployments. In order to talk about that, we really need to think about how are we measuring success, and then try to compare that to see, are we really failing in our deployments, and if so, how poorly, and what might be the causes. If we think about enterprise content management, really what we need to compare against is the vision that organizations and individuals have when they think about the topic. And that really is the ability to have one system that's going to manage all of your unstructured content through its full content management lifecycle. So from the creation of content right through to the disposition of content, all of that unstructured content, all of those files, to be able to manage through that. Most organizations have invested in one, if not many, different platforms. The documents and content server, FileNet, SharePoint are some that we see quite often, but there's numbers of other platforms beyond those. When we actually measure the deployments of those products or those systems against this vision of what enterprise content management means, most deployments you'll find will fall short of that. So that's what the real topic of discussion is today. We speak with a lot of organizations that have looked at their enterprise content management deployment and questioned where are they at and why are they there. And I thought it would be good to start off with really what is the common story that is out there around the state of deployment of an ECM system. Many of our clients have had a system for 5 or 10 years or more. So the technology itself has been around and has been out for quite a while with our clients. And usually what happened was the original deployment kicked off by looking at an eager group within the company that was interested in the technology and what it could do for them, and really focused on migrating some of their quote-unquote important documents into the system. And then things slowed down from there. And here we are 10 years later, and when they look back, they really see that about 5% of their unstructured content, this is anecdotally on average what we hear, 5–10% of those files are being managed in the enterprise content management system, the rest being out on shared drives or other systems that they may have deployed. And about 5% of their users are actually in the system using it the way they have envisioned. So this is where we get to really comparing what's out there to what that vision was and determining are we having success or not. And the bottom line is for most organizations, if we're really measuring against that vision of enterprise content management, then we're not having success. Not having success has some real impacts though. So one is on ROI, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but the system was purchased and planned to deploy it was set around certain expectations of what the system is going to do, and those obviously aren't being met. And the other is, for most of these clients, a lot of the users are perfectly happy working in the shared drive. So at a user level, they're not asking for the move into ECM. So while it might be a good thing for the organization, it's not necessarily something that users are looking for or are asking. So the first thing most of our clients do when they've had an implementation that's been stale and not really meeting their expectations for a while is start to take a look at what went wrong. And the first area to look at is the technology and try to determine whether the ECM platform that was chosen and deployed had any real issues with the technology that led to the lack of adoption and lack of rollout. For the most case, though, while every software rollout can have glitches and bugs along the way, for most cases, clients of ours find that there was no real major technology issue that stalled the deployment. The system largely did what it was advertised to do. They also tend to take a look at the system that they've deployed, especially if it's been around for 5 or 10 years, and just take a look at what's available in the market now. What version are they on? What version can they go to? Just to see where the other leaders in this industry are with the technology. And for the most part, while every system's a little bit different, they all do a lot of the same thing. So generally, we find that the features that have been that are available in the technology that was deployed or is being deployed is still competitive. So that's not really where we went wrong. But of note is many, especially deployments that started maybe 5 or 10 years ago and then failed. We find many of the features that originally were bought into to enhance productivity and record management within the organization were never really turned on. So you may have deployed only a fraction of the real features and functionality that the system offers. So if it's not really the technology, what happened? And largely we find that the failure came from the deployment approach, where the focus was on installing the system. They found a group that was interested. They got that group online. They got a little bit of content in the system, and then things got kind of tough, and things slowed down from there. And as a result, what ended up starting out as this vision of an ECM system, an enterprise content management system, really what was actually deployed was much more like a departmental document management system. So it's much smaller in scope, less content, less users than what we really bought into in the beginning, which is okay because we may still be getting some value from that system at that departmental level, but it's not really what we bought into. If we think that often the licensing for ECM is based on the vision of ECM, which requires every information worker in the company to have a license in order to benefit and interact with the system. So quite often we find that only a fraction of the licenses that were purchased are ever deployed. So the system's automatically, behind the 8 ball in trying to prove an ROI when maybe 10% of the licenses are deployed. And that's a question that a lot of our clients, when they come to us, are starting to scratch their head about when they realize how many licenses they've actually purchased and they're paying maintenance on compared to how many they've deployed. So now this idea of having an ECM system that's not meeting, the full vision of ECM, the rubber really starts to hit the road here because there's real dollars that were invested and continue to be invested in this platform. So we have a really expensive departmental document management system. So the question is, did we overbuy? So did we buy a bigger system than we really needed to? Or did we just underdeploy? And when we look at that, what we're really asking is enterprise content management still the goal of the organization? Well, when we look around then at the alternatives and see the shared drives swelling with content and nobody knows where anything is, and half of that content is out of date and should be either handled by deduplication or disposition processing, all things that are valid and features of an enterprise content management system, we can see that, yeah, ECM still makes sense for most organizations. It's just we need to deploy it in a more effective manner. So, part 2, we're going to talk about what led to this failure and how can we fix it. So we speak with a lot of organizations, and these are some of the trouble spots that we see with the traditional ECM deployment approach. First one, undervaluing migration, and we're going to spend a bit of time on each one of these. Ignoring classification, not utilizing metadata to its fullest capabilities, lack of user involvement in the deployment process, and then managing the change. So these you can see split up between two primary issues that are traditionally ignored or don't get as much consideration as we would like to see. One being content issues, the top 3 largely content issues, and the last 2 being user issues. And that's really what we want to do when we're deploying enterprise content management, is make sure that we're moving users and content into the system. So first, talking about migration. Simple statement, content brings users. So turning on a shiny new system does very little to engage the users. Doing so with all of the users' content there in a way in which they know how to meaningfully interact with it certainly helps the user adoption. So migration is fundamental to the success of enterprise content management. The second point, the follow-up to that being the shared drives will win. So if we're leaving content behind and we're forcing the users to choose between a fairly open, unstructured, unregulated environment like the shared drives and something that's far more defined like the enterprise content management system, the user will prefer the shared drives. It just gives them the ultimate flexibility to do what they want to do. So by not migrating, not only are we not drawing them into the ECM system, we're actually giving them a platform to work in a way that they'd rather work. So I think there's a fundamental viewpoint that needs to be changed when we're talking about enterprise content management system deployment, is that we're not deploying a system. We don't want to set up a system where some content might reside. If it's enterprise content management, we're deploying the system. So we need to get all of the unstructured content into that system so that users can interact with it there. And traditionally, this has been a big problem point. The 2 popular approaches have been migrate the mess and day forward in terms of migration, and neither one worked very well. Migrate the mess is just the scenario where we take a few million files from the shared drive in whatever structure, folder structure they are, and we just move it, the whole thing, into the ECM system. We don't cleanse it, we don't dedupe or run disposition, we don't classify it into a new folder structure, we don't tag it with metadata, we just move that mess in. And when we do that, we're just providing no context about what those files are for the ECM system to be able to manage them. So if the point of ECM is to manage files, migrating them in without any context doesn't allow the system to do that at all. At best, what we'll get here is some enhanced search capabilities. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, I think by far the more popular approach has been the day-forward approach. And that's where we turn the system on, we look back at the shared drives and see, okay, that's a mess. We don't want to deal with that. So let's just draw a line in the sand and say, from this point forward, users please work in the ECM system. And that approach has been around for a long time as well, and there's many clients that have tried that 10 years ago and still only have 5 or 10% of their content in the shared drives. This thought that content will magically accumulate over time, I think, has largely been debunked. So neither of these have proven to be successful migration options. Another thing happens when we don't get this migration bit right is we actually reinforce the use of the shared drive. So when the users come into ECM and they don't see their content, they don't see anything really of value to them, or they don't understand that information structure in which the content is being stored, it really allows them to go back to the shared drive and say, I don't know what's going on from a corporate perspective with that system, but it's not working for me. I'm going to make sure I squirrel away the information that I need here in the shared drives. So that's migration. The second point that has been a major source of problem is content classification. And enterprise content management, obviously we're talking about managing information, and in order to manage it, you need to know what it is. And that's what classification is all about. And we need to be able to classify not just new content as it gets created, but again, if we're looking for users to adopt, we need to classify the legacy content, the stuff that they have been working with and continue to reference on a regular basis. One thing that I'm always surprised to see, but it happens a lot, is organizations that put content in their enterprise content management system without knowing how to identify it for disposition. So we shouldn't think of ECM as just a big bucket we can put stuff in, but stuff that goes in there we need to know how long it needs to be there and how we're going to get rid of it. That's the whole point. Along the topic of classification, we come to the point of folder structure and or metadata development, and ensuring that when we're building out this new information structure for the ECM system, we need to do so, we need two major goals, both of which I think, or I should say, something that hasn't traditionally been a strong point is marrying up these two goals. And one is to have the ECM system work as an effective records management tool, so that, yes, we know how content's classified, we know who should access it and when it should be deleted. But we also need content to be recognizable and that information structure to be recognizable and usable by the business. And this is where we've really fallen down, is trying to marry these two sometimes opposing viewpoints. If we get it right, everybody's happy. If we get it wrong, we're just not going to be where we need to be. And in order to supplement that discussion, just a point here that what we found is your legacy content, so your content sitting outside of your ECM system, regardless of age, tends to be your best asset in terms of creating that new information structure for your enterprise content management system. So while, if we think of it as, in many organizations, it's going to be a mass of files and folders on the shared drive, while they may not be structured in the way that we want in the ECM system, there's still a great wealth of information there in terms of how the organization works, what the terminology is, and there are certainly pockets within those existing repositories that will guide us on what is the best way to organize information in ECM. So there's certainly value to diving into that. hand in hand with the classification is metadata. So depending on how you deploy your ECM technology, folder structures, classification, and metadata all can be somewhat interchangeable sometimes, but metadata obviously is just another way to provide context around these files that we're putting in ECM. And again, we need to be able to ensure that if we're moving in legacy content, we know when it's going to be dispositioned and how it's going to be managed by the system. The metadata really impacts the user experience, everything that you're doing within the system, especially some of the more advanced things like workflows, all can trigger off of metadata. And even, search capabilities. I think a lot of organizations think that just moving to full text search within an ECM system will get them much improved search results. But the bottom line is there tends to be, especially with larger repositories, a lot of positive results when we do just full text searching without metadata, and metadata can really help narrow that down. So those first couple, 3 points have been around content. Things about content that have been overlooked that have limited our success. I'm going to tie those into some things about users and hopefully wrap this up before too long. If we think of ECM success equaling content and users in the ECM system, if that's really our measure, we need to start to think about how do users think about ECM. Now, when we're deploying the technology, we tend to think about the technology. We think about the buttons that we're pushing and all the great things that these buttons are doing. But from a user's point of view, most users are really focused on where's my information, how's it organized, and how can I get that file I need. What that button does is secondary to where my information is. However, they're unable to, that's a broad statement, but it's not their concern to differentiate the system from the information structure. Okay, so as professionals that are deploying this, we understand that those are two completely different things. So we have the base technology, and then we have this information structure that we configure within it. But if I'm a user, I'm going to come into the system, and if I don't see an information structure that relates to me, that's in my terminology, that I can easily navigate the way I've always done, or similar to the way I've always done, it seems like this system isn't for me. It's not a fit. So we need to understand that fact and handle that separately. So we need to handle system issues and information structure issues separately so that people can be comfortable with where their information is, so that then they're interested in what those buttons do. So how do we get to an enterprise content management information structure that makes sense and works for everybody? So one is we need to analyze that legacy content like I talked about. There's a great wealth of information there. The next thing we need to do is we need to start from the top down with our records management or ECM standards. So the analysis here is just a simple function activity or functional classification kind of layout, where the top couple of levels might be set by the enterprise content management deployment in conversation with records management. The bottom, though, is really what we're concerned with when we're talking usability of, because of course it's going to be HR staffing, that's fine, everybody understands that. But we want to make sure that we really figure out 3, 4, and 5, that kind of level of the structure to make sure that it relates to the business users. So by doing a mix of content analysis through user input, we can really make sure that any structure set up within the ECM system makes sense to the business users. And we need to do this obviously department by department or business unit by business unit because this isn't going to be the same across the board. I'm going to take a quick look for questions before I keep carrying on here. There's nothing there right now. Feel free to add something. If you do have a question, I'll come back again in a few minutes. And the last point is manage the change. So this really is a change management exercise. We're really looking to get content and users using this enterprise content management system. And I love this statement. If you build it, they will still be in the shared drive. You cannot expect the users to grab onto the shiny new system if they're happy with that information structure and the files and folders they have been using. So like we've been talking about, we need to help them understand the information structure and feel comfortable with that. An exit strategy from the shared drives. How are we going to actually transition off of them so they're not an option moving forward? And then we need to provide some actual change management training and tools around the project. What we really need to get to a point is where the users are comfortable and happy that they can find content within the system. And really understand that there's two big pieces to that. One is what buttons do I push, so what is this system about, the technology side of it. And the other is, what is this information structure? Is it similar to what I'm familiar with? How is it different? And how can I quickly get the information that I'm interested in? From our experience, one of the tools that we provide is a content map showing a link between the legacy structure, whatever they're familiar with, and the new structure in the ECM system that allows them for a short period of time to navigate one to get to the other. So it's a change management tool to say, okay, if you're not ready to jump in the deep end here on the ECM system, put your toe in the water through this tool, find what you're looking for through the old structure, and let us show you where it's been placed in the new structure. So some things like that can be really helpful for that transition that folks moved over to the new system. We've also found, obviously, that it helps to get them engaged in the process. So in that process of building out the information structure, when they're engaged in that, that's certainly going to translate into better user transitioning. Some pre-migration sessions to show what is this new information structure, how is it different from what I'm used to, what is the new technology, and then obviously those post-migration tools like I talked about. And the goal, if we're really talking about enterprise content management, the goal should be to move people and content at the same time. I often hear these two things separated. So we're going to go live. We're going to go live. We're going to put people in, and then we're going to move the content later. Or variations on that. And that doesn't really add up to success. So what we want to do is have a plan to move people and content at the same time and have the tools in place to support that. Everything that we've talked about so far today are things that obviously Param has spent a lot of time working on and has developed a suite of technology, so software of our own as well as processes in which we can deliver services around these topics to remediate existing enterprise content management deployments or help with new ones so that they don't end up in a point where they're missing some of these key points that are going to add up to success. Today was a fairly quick session. I wanted to run through that information. If you have questions about the how, feel free to reach out to us at Param. I'd be glad to spend more time with anyone who's interested in exactly how we do what we do and how we address some of these issues. I'm going to open it up for questions. If there aren't any questions or comments at this point, feel free to enter them in. And if not, then we'll wrap in a matter of minutes. All right, everyone. I'm not seeing anything come in to the questions panel. So again, if you'd like to learn more about the how do we actually do some of these things, how do we address these areas that we've talked about today, feel free to reach out to us for more information. I appreciate everyone's time. The session was recorded, so if it's something that you're interested in learning more about or sharing with colleagues, feel free to let me know and we can share that with you. One question has come in, and that is, what are the ECM systems your clients ask you to migrate into? So some of the most common ECM systems that we see would be Documentum, OpenText, and SharePoint. Certainly, I should say Oracle Web Center Content on that list, and FileNet towards the end of that list as well. So it's the bigger real enterprise content management with strong records management tools that we commonly see. Thank you for that question. All right, I'm not seeing anything else pop in, so I'm going to wrap things at this point. Thanks everyone for your time and have a great day.